everybody, I'm Steve Schwartz. I focus on helping people get into law schools and, whenever possible, avoid paying for law school at all, or at least avoid significant tuition debt. So the LSAT is the law school admission test. It's the test that you need to get into law school, and it not only determines whether you get in, but it determines, like I said, how much money you ultimately end up paying. Law school ends up costing $300,000 on average for 3 years. Now you might think, why does it cost that much when it's only 3 years? It's because you maybe pay $30,000, $40,000 a year in tuition, but then there's all the money you would have made had you been working during that time. And you can work while you're in law school, but then your grades will suffer, or maybe it will take longer. And so it's important to think about going to law school and minimizing the debt. I encourage students to either go to a top 14 law school or go to a lower ranked law school and avoid the debt altogether. Are any of you thinking about going to law school? Awesome. Yeah, the LSAT's really weird. It's not like any other standardized test you may have taken in the past. It's not the SAT, it's not the GRE, it's not the GMAT. The LSAT, the law school admission test, is a test not of content. It's not a test of memorization. Flashcards will not help you for the LSAT. The LSAT is a test of a different way of thinking, and doing well on it requires a total mindset shift. You have to learn to think like a lawyer, to think critically, analytically, skeptically. So you're looking at dense text, maybe short arguments, maybe reading passages, maybe even logical puzzles. And what you're doing is you're taking general principles and applying them to particular situations. And this comes up in a variety of different ways on the LSAT. The LSAT has 3 different parts: logic games, which are the analytical puzzles. They're kind of mathematical. Then there's logical reasoning, which are short, bite-sized arguments of paragraphs that are just a few sentences long. And then you're asked to maybe strengthen an argument or weaken an argument or identify the conclusion within an argument. That's half the exam. 1 quarter is the games I mentioned before. The other quarter is reading comprehension, which is similar at first to what SAT reading comprehension might look like. Long passages, 450 words each, then several questions associated with each. But again, the focus is not on the content. You don't have to know anything at all about what the passage was saying in terms of material. What you do have to know is how the author of that passage goes about making their argument. And some of this might seem relevant to law, some of it might not. But I assure you that it's all relevant to law, and you'll see that if you ever sit in on a law school class or read a law school case. Because law school cases, you have a real world situation with many different moving parts that you have to manipulate. Imagine like a car crash. One person hits another, but maybe the traffic light wasn't malfunctioning and there was someone else who was speeding through a red light. And so all of those factors come together and you have to parse out and weigh the pros and cons of each side of a case, for example. And the LSAT has a strong correlation with first-year law school grades, much more so than your undergraduate GPA, much more so than any other standardized test. And this is really important. I actually have a controversial opinion, which is that if you can't get a good LSAT score, you should not go to law school. And that's not because you wouldn't make a great lawyer. You could make a fantastic lawyer and do terribly on the LSAT no matter how hard you study. The thing is, you've got to get through law school and then pass the bar exam in order to become a lawyer. And so if you can't get through law school, maybe you drop out after the first semester or the first year, you've sank $20,000, $40,000 into your tuition, and that first year, first semester is worthless to you for your career. So you really want to make sure that if you're going to go to law school, you're going to do well. And the way you prove to yourself that you'll do well is by doing well on the LSAT. And the LSAT, you might take it cold and do terribly. I certainly did. I thought I was going to go to a top 14 law school. I had a good GPA. And then I got a perfectly average LSAT score. The median score is a 151. I got a 152. And that's not a bad score. I'm not saying it's bad. But it's not going to get you into a top 14 law school. And it's not going to get you significant scholarship money. So I wanted to raise my score. And I thought, okay, well, I studied for the SAT in high school for maybe 3 months. I'll do the same here. I took exam after exam, and my scores did not go up. I kept getting low 150s. I burned through 10, 20 exams. There were only 40 released exams at the time, and so I was burning through half the material and getting nowhere. But finally, as I started to change my approach from going through exam after exam and just measuring my results with a spreadsheet, I actually started analyzing my weak areas, the areas where I was struggling, the questions I was getting wrong or having difficulty with, and really looking at my patterns in terms of the mistakes I was getting wrong, the things I was having trouble with, analyzing patterns in my mistakes. And through that process, my scores gradually started to rise until I got a 175 on test day. Now, I talked about these, and by the way, the LSAT's out of a 180. 120 is the lowest you can get, 180 is the highest you can get, and a 170 is the 97th percentile. And even a 165 with a decent GPA will get you into a top 14 law school, and anything in the 160s could get you into maybe a top 50 law school, which are perfectly respectable, good schools to go to. But I'm saying you want to invest the time. 2 months is not enough. 3 months is not enough. I studied for a full year. You don't need to spend that long, of course. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. There's plenty of great resources out there today. Of course, I've put together a lot myself, and I'll tell you a little bit about them. But basically, in the past 10 years, there's been an enormous surge in free online test prep materials. The Law School Admission Council has recently partnered with the Khan Academy, and so they have tons of free YouTube videos about the LSAT in partnership with the Law School Admission Council. And then I myself, I'm recording this right now, this will be on YouTube later, I'm putting out new YouTube videos every single day about LSAT prep. You go to youtube.com/LSAT blog, and you'll be able to browse them all. Some of them just me talking like this, some of them are me in my office, some of them are me chatting with other LSAT people, law school admissions people, actual lawyers. And it's kind of funny because I talked to these lawyers and I asked them, well, what's law like? And one of them was saying to me, quite literally, he spends his time driving around from meeting to meeting, from office to office. It's not like on TV where people are in courtroom giving these big impassioned speeches. Most of it is actually analyzing text, analyzing contracts, which is, again, very similar to what the LSAT will be like. Now, I talked about these previously released exams that I did. Back when I was studying, there were about 45 or so released exams. Now there are 86 released exams that are numbered, at least. There's even more that are unnumbered. These exams are called prep tests. Prep tests, one word. There's a free one on LSAC's website. If you just Google June 2007 LSAT PDF, you'll be able to find that free exam. You can take it, you can download it, try it out. I wouldn't stress about the results because chances are you won't do well. That's okay. Almost nobody does well the first time they do one. But it's a good way to get some familiarity with what the exam is actually like. And then beyond that, you can get those other exams I mentioned. They release 3 of them a year. They're published in books of 10 on Amazon. They're called like actual official LSAT prep tests. You can buy them in these books of 10. They're about $20 each. And any book for the LSAT that is under $20 is not a book that's worth getting because that book probably does not contain real LSAT questions. There's a big difference between the real LSAT questions published by the Law School Admission Council. They are very carefully regulated and analyzed to be certain that they contain no mistakes and are valid with only one correct answer. But some other prep companies like Barron's, for example, they don't want to pay the licensing fee to LSAC, so they make up their own questions. But their questions honestly are pretty terrible. They contain mistakes, they might have 2 right answers or no right answer or contain typos, and the LSAT is hard enough that you don't want to make it harder for yourself when the mistake is not with you, but with the test makers. So get the real exams. There's nearly 100 of them now, and you can do maybe 1 a week in the lead up to your test date. Now, I know that some of you were thinking about taking the LSAT. Any of you have an idea when you might take it? March, June, July? Okay, so the LSAT, yeah?
How many tests are there per year?
That's a great question. So for most of my career, until last year actually, the LSAT was offered 4 times a year. February, June, September or October, and then December. That is changing because of the rise in competition from the GRE. Some law schools are starting to take GRE scores as well for people with science and math backgrounds primarily. So the LSAT makers want to compete. The GRE is offered virtually every weekday on the computer. The LSAT was 4 times a year. They're now increasing it to 9 or 10 times a year. And right now we're in February. The LSAT dates this year coming up are in March. There's March 30th. There's June 3rd. There's July 26th, I believe, and then the fall. Now, the LSAT's in a weird year of transition because not only is it going from 4 times a year to like 10 times a year, but it's also going from paper and pencil format to digital. Now, you might be used to doing practice exams in books or printouts or PDFs. That's changing because the LSAT is going to be on a tablet starting in July. And the tablet interface is very different from the paper and pencil format. You might be used to writing on the page, underlining, highlighting, circling, making notes right next to the question. On the digital LSAT, you're not going to be able to do that. You'll have some limited ways to interact with the text on the tablet, but you can't draw freehand on it the way you can on a page. So if you're thinking of going to law school in the next few years, keep in mind your LSAT scores are good for 5 years. So if you want to take the LSAT in the old paper and pencil format, you have only 2 more chances to do that. There's March 30th and there's June 3rd. Then in late July, they start the transition to digital. And what that's going to look like is half of test takers are going to get the digital format that day, half will get paper and pencil. The test makers choose for you, and you don't get any advance notice. And I don't know about you, but I would not want to be in that situation, walking into test day, not knowing what I'm going to be facing. And so I'm encouraging everyone I speak to now to take the LSAT by June if you can. If your timeline is longer, that's okay. You could take it September, it'll be guaranteed digital, and at least you know what you're going to be facing. But if your timeline is longer, then of course you want more time to study. You'll make the best of it when that comes along down the line. People often ask about, well, when should I take the LSAT? I would say overall, I want paper and pencil. I go for March and June. But in general, for a timeline, law school admissions is conducted on a rolling basis, meaning that there's not really a hard and fast deadline for law school applications. You can apply whenever, anytime from like September until maybe even March or June the following year for the same cycle. So let's say you want to go to law school a year and a half from now, next fall. You could take the LSAT anytime this year, apply this fall, this winter, or even a year from now, and then go to law school in fall of 2020. You could do that. Law schools evaluate applications in the order in which they are received, but they also want to see who else is going to come along. So they might delay or waitlist a lot of people to see down the line. So you could apply in September and not even hear back till March. That's just the name of the game. They want to see who else comes along. But you're actually in the privileged position here because over the past 15 to 20 years, law schools have been springing up everywhere. There's more and more law schools all the time, but a couple of years ago, the number of people applying to law school started declining. So law schools are actually desperate for applicants, although they might not seem that way at first glance. What that means is that if you can get an LSAT score that's above the median of their previous class, they'll throw scholarship money at you in order to woo you or lure you to go to their school over a different one. And so the LSAT score really does make a big difference. In terms of law school applications as a whole, it might be something like 50% of your odds are decided by the LSAT score, maybe 35% by your GPA, and 15% only with all the other factors like personal statements, letters of recommendation, any other essays you might be submitting as well. So the LSAT score really is the biggest part of that. And it's funny because you earn your GPA over the course of 3 to 4 years maybe, but your LSAT is 1 day. And so when I talk about spending 2 to 3 months, it's really not enough time. A lot of the traditional live classes, whether they're in person or online, take place over the course of 2 to 3 months, not because that's what students need, but because that's what it's feasible to offer. The test prep companies would have to double their prices in order to offer courses on a longer timeline. And if you're working, you're in school, you have family obligations, it's hard to commit for that long a period. And so what I would suggest is whether you do a course or not, lengthen your LSAT study timeline. Maybe you want to study over a period of 3 to 6 months. That's what I typically recommend in order for you to achieve your fullest potential. I know I've said a lot so far. Any questions about anything I've covered up to this point? Yeah?
When should you start preparing for the LSAT?
Well, it depends when you want to go to law school. LSAT scores are good for 5 years. So I would say maybe you want to pick a target test date 3 to 6 months from now, assuming that you're not going to have a ton of other things going on during that time.
So you'll take the LSAT before you get an acceptance letter to law school?
Yeah, you'll have to submit an LSAT score before you apply. Yeah, so you can apply if you're still an undergrad. You can apply even before the end of your senior year. Yeah, question?
How much does it cost?
The LSAT, taking the LSAT in terms of registering for it costs about $180. $180. Yeah, so that's for one test administration. They charge a lot, but they also invest a ton of money in producing the exam, and so that's kind of where a lot of that money goes. And people often think about retaking. It's an interesting question because you take the LSAT, but maybe you didn't know what you were doing with the first time around. Maybe you didn't study properly, or maybe you just had a bad day. So be it. That happens. It's okay. You can always retake the LSAT, and law schools do not average multiple LSAT scores. They used to back in 2005 and prior, but starting in 2006, they changed their policy so they only consider the highest. So you could take the LSAT and get a 140, then take it 3 months later and get a 170. They will consider you as if you had gotten a 170. They will ignore the 140 score. So that's a really good position to be in. That means that there's always a reason to retake if you think you can do better. And it's crazy, but even just getting a single point or two higher can make the difference between a yes or a no, or between getting another $10,000 a year in scholarship money. One thing I should say about scholarships, though, is that law schools are a little bit sneaky sometimes. They have their own interests in mind, like I said, because they have the shrinking class sizes, but they have their bloated bureaucracies to support. So they want to admit students who are going to raise their rankings and want to admit students who are going to make them look good. And so what they do is they tell maybe half the entering class, if you are in the top third of admitted students, we'll give you X thousand dollars in tuition scholarships. But they're offering that to half the class. So automatically, 17% of people are not going to win that scholarship, but everyone thinks they're going to be lucky ones who do get the scholarship. So you have to really be careful and think about when you go to law school, are you going to be able to put in the time? This is not a part-time endeavor. You can try to go part-time, but typically in my experience, the people who do best in law school, who get the good GPAs, are the ones who are really able to commit themselves as fully as possible to the process. It really is an all-in kind of thing. Questions? Yeah.
What's the highest score you can get on the LSAT?
The highest score you could possibly get is a 180. The LSAT's on a 120 to 180 kind of spectrum. 120 is the lowest, 180 is the highest, 151 is the median. Now, for any top 50 school, maybe a score of 155, 160 and above will be good enough. It depends on your GPA, of course, as well. One thing you can do is you can go online. If you just Google LSAC GPA Calculator, there's a little tool online where you can input your LSAT score and GPA and then see what your odds would be at a wide variety of law schools. Of course, that doesn't tell the whole story, because if you have a family who went there, that can help. If you're an underrepresented minority, that can also help. If you have good letters of recommendation, good personal statements, those can also make some difference as well. But mostly it will be your LSAT score and your GPA. And so if you're thinking about your GPA, it's kind of funny to say this, but you want to take easier classes where you're going to get a better GPA. They don't reward you for taking biochemistry, and even if you get like a C minus, when you could have taken something easier and gotten an A. Unfortunately, that's just how they calculate it. So there's a benefit to taking easier classes if your sole focus is getting into a top law school. It's strange, but that's how it works. Now, about LSAT schedules, like I said, 3 to 6 months, doing not necessarily every single LSAT ever released, but maybe the most recent couple dozen, maybe 20 to 30 exams overall. That's a lot, but think back to when you took the Regents exams. The Regents exams, all the previous ones are online as PDFs, right? You could do the old ones, and you know exactly what you're going to see on test day. It's the same thing with the LSAT. You have all those old released exams. They release 3 a year. There's 86 numbered ones. You do a handful of those, and you'll have a much better understanding of what your test is going to be like. It changes very little from year to year and from test administration to test administration. So you want to do a bunch of the old ones, but not timing yourself at first, because the LSAT is strictly timed, and the timing is a whole separate matter aside from the content. So you want to focus on accuracy first, building your foundation in the test content alone. The logic games, meaning the puzzles. Then you have the logical reasoning, the short arguments. Then you have the reading comprehension, which are the passages. You focus on each of those, just building your foundation, accuracy, untimed. Once you've done that, then you move on to timing with individual timed 35-minute sections. Then finally, once you've got that down, you move on to endurance, because you've got 5 sections with only a 10 to 15-minute break in the middle. So that's like over 3 hours you're sitting there doing this. It's a lot. It's exhausting. Your brain's going to be fried by the end. Mine still is when I do this now. So you've got 5 sections, like I said, but there's actually only 3 different kinds of questions: games, reasoning, reading comp. You have 1 section of the games, 2 sections of logical reasoning, 1 section of reading comp, and then one experimental section that could be any of those previous 3 I mentioned. So that's 5 altogether. They give you 3 of them back to back, no break. That's an hour and 45 minutes. Then you get a short break of 10 to 15 minutes. Then you have 2 more sections back to back. So it's pretty brutal. And that's why I'm saying you want to do a lot of those for practice before you do the real thing on test day. Otherwise, you take it on test day, you bomb it because you're not used to the timing or the endurance, then you're retaking and paying another $180 or whatever it is. Now, that's not the end of the world, but it delays your applications. It means you're studying for another month or 2, so you want to avoid that if you can. If not, of course, not the end of the world. And by the way, speaking of the fee to take the LSAT, if your income is below a certain level, they give fee waivers, meaning you could take the LSAT for free, maybe even twice, and they also give you a prep book for free as well. So if you might qualify for that, if your IRS documents show low income, you can apply for that and they'll help you out there. Another thing to think about is that if you have ADHD and you can get a doctor's note, something like that, they can also give you testing accommodations, which means that you get extra time. Maybe you get an extra break in the middle. Maybe you get a time and a half, or you get double time. That makes a big difference because the LSAT is so strictly timed, and law schools will never know that you got the extra time. So that's kind of a bonus as well. Question?
If you are an ESL person, do they give you extra time?
If you're ESL, they don't automatically give extra time for that. No, I don't think so. I work with a lot of non-native speakers, and unfortunately, they're up against additional barriers because the LSAT vocabulary and content is hard enough as it is for anybody, native speaker or not. And so if you're a non-native speaker, unfortunately, that just means that it's going to be a little bit tougher for you and you might want to have a longer timeline. As a side note, though, if your native language is Spanish, there is a Spanish LSAT in Puerto Rico. Not to say you're going to go to Puerto Rico to do it, but they have some sample ones online that are totally in Spanish. So you could at least look at those to look at it in your native tongue before doing it in English. That's one thing to consider as well. Other questions about the LSAT and admissions? Yeah, of course, there's one back there. Yeah?
How much do you pay for the application?
So applications are separate. The LSAT itself is $180 or so. Law school applications, the fees will vary. I think they're typically around $90 or $100 per application. But some law schools will give fee waivers. Some for financial need and some for merit, some because they just want to get more applicants. Typically, the lower ranked law schools are more likely to give fee waivers because they want to drive their applications. That's something to consider. But of course, it's all online now, so there's not much of a reason not to apply to additional law schools if you might want to go there. I'd say typically a lot of people apply to maybe 8 to 12 law schools overall. That's not an unreasonable number. And considering that your essays will be pretty much the same for all of them, it's not that much additional effort to apply to more schools. And then if you apply to multiple, you get into multiple, maybe multiple of them offer you scholarship money. You can then kind of play them off each other and say, well, school A offered me $20,000, so you should match that or exceed that, So it becomes a bit of a game there. You email back and forth a little bit. Maybe if you got waitlisted or deferred, you can send a follow-up letter maybe 3 months in saying, hey, just wanted to remind you I'm still interested in going to your school. It's my top choice. Here's an update. My spring semester GPA improved or something like that, or I got a promotion at work. You can include that as well. By the way, speaking of applications, one thing you might want to think about if you're applying this fall is start talking to your recommenders, your professors, your employers, anyone you know who may be in a position to help you out. Reach out to them and request the letter early, because if you request it in the fall, they might be handling other letters at the same time, and then it slows the whole process down. So I would definitely recommend asking early. Questions about the application? Yeah?
Oh, sorry, the test is online?
So the LSAT has traditionally been a paper and pencil exam. It's going to be digital later this year, and it's going to be on a tablet, but you're not going to do it from home. You're going to do it from a test center. So typically, a lot of law schools like New York Law School, Pace University downtown, Columbia, they all administer the LSAT. There's some high schools in Brooklyn and Queens as well that do it. CUNY does it. And so you might want to register for a test center near where you live to cut down on your commute. And I would recommend registering for the LSAT early, because the best and most convenient test centers get booked up really fast. Like, for example, the ones in Midtown Manhattan, downtown, they get booked up really early, and then students have to go to like Staten Island or New Jersey when they live in the city, and it kind of becomes a bigger thing. So I'd recommend registering early. I would not recommend Columbia. The desks there are really small. PACE is kind of okay. The best things I've heard about are New York Law School, which is also, I believe, a little bit downtown from here, but that's a good one to go check out. And it varies based on administration, but those are the usual suspects for taking the LSAT. Some law schools, some undergrads, they offer free and low-cost LSAT preparation to help people apply to law school who might otherwise not have the money for prep or might otherwise not even consider it. And so there are a variety of different pipeline programs that are offered at different universities. I don't know all the specifics on each one, but I'd recommend definitely Googling NYC LSAT pipeline program, and they might have free and low-cost LSAT prep if you want to go to something in person. Some law schools, if your stats are a little bit below their medians, let's say that your LSAT and GPA are below what they're looking for their students that they're taking, but they otherwise like you, what they might do is say, hey, we'll take you if you do this summer program before law school starts, maybe to brush up on your writing skills or something like that. And so it's a kind of a backdoor way to get in. You end up with the same great law degree in the end, but you ended up just having to do a little bit supplemental work beforehand. But it's a good way to get in. It's certainly something to ask about if you think you might not otherwise get in. Just talk to admissions officers. They really do want to help you. I wouldn't be a stranger to them. And you say to them, hey, my LSAT's this, my GPA is that. What are my odds? They might say, go ahead. You have a good shot. Or they might say, retake the LSAT. We need just another point or two on your score, and that'll make the difference for them. But again, they need that score from you because their jobs rest on their school keeping its place in the U.S. News rankings. If you Google NYC LSAT pipeline program, you might find some programs at different local colleges and universities that have good LSAT prep and good application support. CUNY offers one, and Pace University in White Plains, the School of Law up there, I think they have something too. But you can learn the tools for how to analyze law school cases properly. There's some great books on that. There's one called Getting to Maybe, which is a classic book for doing well on law school exams.
Getting to Maybe?
Yeah. And, I have my podcast, LSAT Unplugged, focused on the LSAT, but I'm actually friends with a law school professor at Pace who has a law school focused podcast called Law to Fact. And she interviews law school professors on there. And so you can kind of hear the content of what you'd be experiencing in law school. You can just absorb it all like while you're on your commute. And then you walk into law school, you already know everything. Of course, you won't know everything, but it'll give you some familiarity with it. You can learn it, but it takes time. And again, it's a different way of thinking. It's not really aptitude because you can improve significantly once you gain some familiarity. But of course, if you walk into like an Arabic class or a Japanese class, you don't know those languages. Of course, first day, first week, first month, you won't do well. You won't know what's going on. But over time, you gain familiarity, then it becomes much easier because you at least know the language of what you're dealing with. So you can improve with time, but you kind of have to jump in and just look it over. But like I said, because there are 86 plus released LSAT exams, you can go over all of those and then use explanations to help you pave the way. There are free explanations on YouTube. There's also free ones if you just Google them. There's forums, there's websites that cover this all in depth. My website, the LSAT blog, is just one of those. There are many others as well. But like I said, there's those 86 numbered exams. There are detailed forums with explanations for all 86 of them, every single question. There's 100 questions per exam, meaning there's thousands and thousands of released ones, but it's all laid out for you online for free. So there's really no reason you can't start digging into it and gaining that familiarity. You really can improve. Maybe it takes more than 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, but it's worth the investment, like I said, because it weighs more than your GPA, but it takes much less time to get there. I obviously have some aptitude for this because I'm doing it full time for over 10 years now, but it's not just me. There are many, many people who have gone through this process. So if you're studying alone and you feel like you're not making headway, don't stay isolated with this. Find a study group, find a tutor, find a class, go online, go on YouTube. But also I have on my website, the LSAT blog, I have LSAT Diaries where students have written in guest posts. There's like hundreds of them where people lay out their exact study process. Whether they use my materials or not, I don't even care. I just want to get the stories out there. And so I have people who started at a 130 who went to a 150 or a 140 to a 160. Wherever your starting point is, you can find someone who's at that same starting point and then raise their score 10, 15, 20 points. Maybe it takes more than a month or two, of course. And so while you're in it, it can feel really slow. But if you read the stories, you'll see people's progressions over time in their LSAT diaries where they lay out exactly how they got to that endpoint of whatever score they got, and then maybe even what law school they went to. So to help pave the way for you, on my site, I also have study schedules laying out exactly what to do week by week and even day by day. How to use all those numbered released LSAT prep tests, and also how to use other resources like guides and blog posts and forums and cheat sheets, all that sorts of stuff. I lay it all out so I can say to you, read these pages, then do these practice problems, then watch these videos, then go on to the next question type and do the exact same thing all over again. So I really try to get hyper specific with everything for you so that there's no guesswork about what to be doing next in your study process. Because the last thing I want you to do is do yet another timed exam and measure your results and be happy you're sad about them and then move on. That's not where the growth comes from. The growth comes from the review process. And so that's where I want you to really spend the majority of your study time. Yeah?
These books to start, where can we find them?
So the best books to use are actual LSAT exams. They're on Amazon. Just type LSAT PrepTests or actual official LSAT PrepTests, and you'll find all the released LSAT exams on Amazon. And most of them are in books of 10 for about $20 each.
Like these, the ones you have on this.
Well, that's a resource I put together, just like a free cheat sheet summary. But if you want the actual old exams, I go on Amazon for them. Again, they're actual official LSAT prep tests. Aside from that, there are many other good guides on there as well. Just make sure that they're using real LSAT problems.
But how will we know if they're real LSAT problems?
Because they'll tell you the prep test number and the date and year it was administered. The books that contain fake LSAT questions, if you look at the reviews, they'll often have mediocre reviews. Like they'll have like 1 star, 3 stars. This book contained mistakes, something like that. But when they are paying the licensing fee to use the real questions, they will put that front and center on the book's cover. They will say real LSAT exams, and you can even look and see which specific ones they were containing. But ultimately, the LSAC, the Law School Admission Council, they're the best people to get the books from on Amazon because you know for sure those are real LSAT exams.
And do they give you the explanations and everything as well?
It's a funny thing. So the LSAT exams, they only give you the answer key, no explanations, no solutions. So you have to go elsewhere for them. And so for that, you can go on YouTube, you can go on forums and such and see what myself and others have written or made videos about for each actual LSAT problem. And you can get all the detailed walkthroughs there. And you can go to maybe 3 different sites and see what 3 different people have to say about that problem. Maybe one person's explanation doesn't click for you, so you look at a different one, and then so on. And it's good to get different takes on things. What does the review process look like? I said to review, but how do you do that? The explanations are good, but they're what somebody else said, and you don't want to use them as a crutch. So you can use them at the beginning of your study process to gain a little bit of better understanding, but once you've got the foundation, then you've got to look at your own thought process, meaning that for every question that you got wrong or had difficulty with, what was tempting about the wrong answer choice that made you pick it, and what ultimately makes it wrong, and what is discouraging about the right answer choice that pushes you away from it, and what ultimately makes that choice correct. There are traps of encouragement towards wrong answers and traps of discouragement away from right answers. And so maybe the LSAT has 1,000 tricks like that, and you're not falling for all 1,000 of them, or else you'd be getting every single question wrong, like getting a perfect 0, like a 120. So you're not falling for all tricks, only some of them. You have to figure out specifically which tricks you personally are uniquely prone to falling for so that you can avoid making those same mistakes again. Kind of like with the Regents, it's the same thing over and over. The LSAT's the same thing. And so if you don't learn from your mistake one time, you might make it again in the future. And the LSAT really does repeat itself. They're very lazy in a way of reusing old stuff and just changing it, kind of like window dressing. So you really have to look at what your mistakes were so that you can avoid making them in the future. LSAT scores are good for 5 years, meaning that if you take it now, you could still apply 4 years from now and be okay. But I'd want you to have a little bit more wiggle room just in case of something. So I'd say maybe 3 years from now, if you have some downtime for a period of 6 months, that's a good time to do the LSAT. Because if, let's say, maybe your family if you have kids, your family can help out with that, or maybe work is slow that time, or you're not in school anymore. If you have some downtime for 6 months where work isn't too busy, you study then and knock it out. You get the score on record and you're done with it. I'd say that's the best way to do it when you have the free time, ultimately. Because the scores are good for so long. And then also I'd say don't wait until the last minute to take it because you want to have the chance to retake if you need to. So maybe if you're going to apply 4 years from now, take the LSAT 2.5 years from now, then your score was okay, but you want to do better, you have another 3 to 6 months to go for a retake. It really depends on the school in terms of what GPA they want. Some schools, top 14 law school or a top 5, they're going to want above like a 3.6, 3.7 for sure. Maybe a top 50, they're okay with a 3.3 or a 3.2. If your GPA is below that, that's not the end of the world. It just means you have to have an even better LSAT score to make up for it. Every school has its own admissions index where they have a formula where they take your LSAT score and your GPA and they mix them together and then spit out their result. And so maybe Harvard wants a really high LSAT, but their GPA could be lower, and maybe Duke cares more about GPA than LSAT. It could vary from school to school, but ultimately it typically is LSAT is bigger, GPA is smaller, everything else is tiny in comparison. So you just want to have the best LSAT possible ultimately. And like I said, for GPA, take easier classes where you can get a better GPA. It's crazy to say that, but that's just how it works. If the LSAT and law school is ultimately your focus.
Do you mind if I ask what law school you went to?
I didn't go to law school.
Oh, but you took the LSAT?
It's funny, yeah. So I was considering law school. It's how I got into this. But then I graduated college, had my 175 on record. I started tutoring, and I really loved it. And so I kept doing that. And I tutored other stuff in the past, so I knew how to tutor, and then I knew the LSAT, so I put them together, and then I built my website and online stuff, and it kind of all just built from there.
So you're currently at school?
Yeah, I do this full time. Full time every day. I'm making more LSAT content, videos, podcasts, coaching, webinars, in-person stuff like this, one-on-one coaching. That's pretty much what I do. It's a lot of fun.
Okay. Do you have to have a degree in either criminal law or any form of law to go to law school? Can you have a business degree and study for the LSAT and take your LSAT?
You can major in anything. It's kind of funny, really, because what you learn in undergrad has nothing to do with the LSAT and nothing to do with law school. The LSAT and law school are related, but that's it. Then law school helps you pass the bar. But then even passing the bar, I think you'll agree, that has nothing to do with practicing law. It really is worth investing in this process. And I'm not just saying that because that's what I do in this industry. I'm saying that there are people I talk to who sometimes don't want to buy another $20 book. But a $20 book with 10 more exams, if that could get you even a single point more on your LSAT score, which gets you into a better school or gets you more scholarship money, the return on investment on that is huge. You're talking about the entire course of the rest of your career. And so at the very least, you want to get the best books possible. Maybe not an in-person class that's $1,000 plus, but an online one, maybe live online or recorded online. There's a lot of very affordable online recorded courses that are only a couple $100. And it really is, you can watch at your own pace, kind of like Netflix on demand. And it really is valuable, especially when you're working or in school and you have to fit in the time late at night or on the weekend and squeeze it in here and there. And then there's also YouTube, of course. But whether you pay for it or not, definitely use resources. They're out there, they're free, they're low cost. The internet really does bring down the price, and it's worth it. Another thing to consider is the part-time programs, the part-time evening programs a lot of schools offer. I know that Fordham has one. Pace probably does too. And the nice thing about the part-time programs is that you can work full-time and still go in the evening, and maybe it takes you 4 or 5 years instead of 3, but at least you're doing it in a way that works for you, and you're slowing it down a bit. I think doing a full law school course load while you're working, keep in mind you're competing against those who are not working, and the classes are on a curve. So automatically you're at a disadvantage from day one. And your law school GPA and how you do in the class, your percentile rank, can affect what your summer job options are, your summer associateships. Yeah. A lot of that will be based on, are you in the top third of your class? Another thing to think about is the part-time programs. They're a little bit easier to get into on average. So maybe you don't have the LSAT or GPA to get into Fordham full-time, but part-time, where the required LSAT's a little bit lower, maybe you can get into that and you still walk away with the same certificate or the same degree at the end, either way. Law school tuitions have skyrocketed just as undergrad tuitions have skyrocketed, and it's really because the federal government has given out loans for whoever wants them, however much money you want. And so law schools raise their tuitions because they can say to the students, well, just go ask the government for the money. And so the problem is that this is not really free money, because when you graduate, you'll be liable for it. And you can have a payment plan, but it'll take you 10, 20, 30 years to pay it off in the end. And so it's better to avoid that in the first place if possible by getting the scholarship money for having a good LSAT score. If you can avoid law school debt and go to a slightly lower ranked school but go for free, in many cases that is better than going to a marginally better ranked school but paying tens of thousands of dollars for it. And you have to consider your own personal situation, of course, but this is my personal take on what I think works for most students.
Absolutely.
Yeah, being able to graduate without debt is huge, because you graduate without debt, you can go for whatever job you want. Maybe you want public interest, maybe you want immigration law. But if you graduate with 6 figures in debt, then maybe the corporate law job looks like it makes more sense for you, especially if you have like family obligations or something. And the corporate law jobs are really, really grueling hours. And so if you care about spending time with your family, you won't be able to do that much of that, at least in the first 10 plus years of that job, especially if you want to make partner or something like that. But if you have your own law practice, you do immigration law, or you do public interest and immigration, at least you're doing something you really care about, and you maybe will have a little bit more flexibility. Thanks for having me, everybody. Really appreciate it.